Okay, so where do we begin? Basically, I generally start by taking a divide and conquer approach on the character, trying to determine what I think the skeletal structure is going to be and divide it up into individual discrete systems. I try to have it so that none of my systems are really sharing any primary joints or any components, so that there's kind of a beginning and an end, a termination in each system that doesn't affect the operation of any other system. We're going to start by looking at limbs and take a closer look at just the human arm. And the two different types of considerations that we want to have when we're going to be dividing this thing up. Generally, we need to consider the arc of motion that the thing's going to have. Basically, if we look at a shoulder, where's the shoulder now at its rest position versus where's it going to be when the shoulder shrugs up, in relationship to, the ear of the character. That will define the length, much more than looking at the actual anatomy of a character. A lot of people will tend to, look at the clavicle and use that as a reference point for creating the arc of motion for the shoulder. The problem we'll always run into is, well, if we center our shoulder joint around the base of the clavicle, is that actually going to give us, the arc of the motion that we want? If we look at, the character, from above, we're going to see with the joint streaming backwards, in its rest position, as the joint comes forward, the character is going to essentially appear to be getting wider. Conversely, if we went too far back, we'll get the same thing. As the joint rotates forward from its rest, the character is going to get really narrow. Placement of the joint. A lot of times you'll see people placing the joint, similar to what the trapezius is doing, and they'll have a shoulder joint up here. Well, same thing. As the shoulder raises up, you're going to have your character getting, broader, which isn't really going to be the case. And then, if you're trying to get, your shoulder to come, close in contact just below the ear, you're going to be overshooting the mark. So I generally try to take an approach where I'm looking at the actual, what is the full radius of the joint, and I use that to define where the center of my shoulder is going to be. A sphere is a great way to visualize it. I generally find that you can usually go pretty straight out from where your arm socket's going to be, straight into the character, and usually you're not going to be, conform too much front or back. If you're going to go anything at all, slightly forward. But the range of motion on the shoulder is not all that great. You just want to make sure that your shoulder is where it's gonna, where you want it to end up, at the end of the day. Beyond looking at the shoulder, we can look at like the main part of the arm. Arm being divided up into multiple pieces. When we look at the arm, we essentially have a plane that's being defined. And I like to visualize that plane because that's actually going to tell me the rotation of my bones. I set up all my orientations to automatically, follow where the position of my joints are, or you can, do it after the fact. But essentially, any bone within the center of the plane is only going to move in a single axis. It's only going to bend within that plane. The actual rotation plane is going to be defined by major rotations at the head of the plane, up at the shoulder. And one thing you'll notice in characters is that or in most, in people, is the upper arm and the lower arm are approximately the same length. You'll also find that proportion is the same within the leg. The upper leg and lower leg are approximately the same length. That allows us to actually touch our shoulders, touch our heads. When we squat down, we sit on our heels. You'll find this proportion in almost every animal. The upper and mid legs of a dog, of a horse, and the arms as well are approximately the same length and have that same function. So I've been lucky to have the time to develop some systems for working over time, so that I can automatically display, when I'm working. I like to know the actual lengths of what I'm dealing with, so I know the proportion of, my upper arm to my lower arm lengths, so that I can visualize the plane, because that will determine, where's my elbow going to bend in relationship to the geometry. If I've got a character whose arm, you know, has the elbow down there, I need to know that when the IK control is brought up, it's going to bend in a certain direction. So some tools like this, really simple to put together, or just evaluating in your channel editor the lengths of your bones as you're putting them together, will help you come up with that proportionality that we're looking for. You'll also find planes are really great and helpful for visualizing things, like fingers. Your fingers are all going to work with inside a single plane. So just having a system where you can define the plane of the whole finger, all of your joints moving within that plane, makes it really quick and easy to lay out your bones when essentially all you're dealing with is the length of the individual sections of the finger and the overall plane of that finger. Let's load an example of a finished rig so we can look at some of the final results here. I talked about having systems that begin and end, and one of the nice things about that is you can have some results that aren't typical by just having your skeleton, parented together. Most of the time we're going to have, some kind of an IK system or FK system for the arms. We can change this to some kind of an FK mode, but generally your FK mode, you're going to basically have your arms following that. If my upper arm bone was actually the end of my shoulder, that would be the only way that I could have it work. But if I was to separate it so that my shoulder had basically a shoulder and a shoulder end, and then I had my upper arm starting on something else where I could basically constrain it back into the shoulder, I could make it operate in a different fashion so that the orientation changes of the shoulder don't actually affect the orientation of the arm, just the position of it. Let's take a quick look at the leg, and the leg is very similar to the arm in that just mainly a two-bone IK type system. But one of the main differences between the arm and the leg is that within the arm, the hand is a fairly independent system within itself. It generally has its own orientation, and its orientation isn't really governed by the orientation of the arm at all. The foot, on the other hand, and the leg are pretty well married. If you take your own leg and you lift your knee up and you try to you move your knee around, when you reorient your leg, the chances are you're going to see that your knee and your foot are almost always in alignment. Your foot, while it is independent, and you can rock it and do some independent things to your foot, for the most part, the foot does define the direction of the knee, so or vice versa, depending on whether your weight is on your foot or whether your foot's hanging from your waist. But by default, if you can define those off as being two planes, but initially in alignment to one another, then you'll kind of see the similarities between how a human works and how any other character works. We do have the advantage of having a few extra degrees of freedom in our ankles, but if you look at the structure of a human leg, it's actually very similar to the structure of a dog or even a horse leg. The main differences come down to the actual proportions between the different parts of the foot.